Law enforcement of Reddit. What was the most scary/paranormal call you have responded to? Serious. It was a late evening, maybe a decade ago, when I responded quietly to a call with additional units right behind me. The caller, a middle-aged woman who lived alone, reported hearing what she thought were footsteps upstairs while she was in the kitchen. She was divorced, had no children, and wasn't expecting any visitors. By the time we arrived, she was standing across the street, visibly shaken and being comforted by her neighbor. As we pulled up, other officers were already setting up a perimeter around the property, stationed at the corners of the house. We spoke with the woman, who gave us permission to enter, so we made the decision to announce ourselves and clear the house. 3 of us stacked up at the front door, called out, and then made our way inside, while the rest of the team observed from a distance, watching the windows under cover. The woman had been preparing a late dinner, and I remember how delicious the house smelled as we entered. After clearing the ground floor, we headed toward the stairs when we heard it. Footsteps, distinct, steady, and measured, coming from the wood floors above. It wasn't the frantic sound of someone trying to hide or escape. These footsteps were deliberate, almost methodical. We called out again, but there was no response. The footsteps faded away, as if whoever or whatever was up there had simply walked off. My heart was racing, adrenaline spiking as I made my way up the stairs. I stopped a few steps shy of the landing to focus, then slowly ascended, peering around the corner. The hallway at the top was pitch black, but we cleared it, one room at a time. No one. Nothing. No sign of any intruder. Not even an animal. But whatever had made those footsteps certainly didn't sound like any creature I'd ever encountered. After we finished the initial search, other officers went over the entire house. Every corner was checked, bedrooms, closets, even the appliances like the washer and dryer. Every nook and cranny was thoroughly searched. Nothing was out of place. No one had been hiding. We eventually invited the woman back inside and assured her that there was no one in the house. We suggested that the noise could have been due to the house's natural expansion or contraction. Outside, none of the officers had seen anyone leave, and there were no signs that anyone had tried to break in. The windows and doors were intact, showing no signs of tampering. I stayed behind for about 30 minutes after the other officers cleared the call, waiting for a friend of the woman to arrive and stay with her for the night. I went over some basic security tips, double-checking that all the windows and doors were secure. As I waited, she kindly offered me some well-done lasagna. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that I encountered something not entirely of this world that night, something that defies explanation. Early in my career, the elevators in the older section of CIA headquarters, known as the original headquarters building, OHB, had a few quirks. I'm pretty sure they still do. Every now and then, the elevator would stop and the doors would open to a floor with no one in sight, and no one on the elevator had requested that floor. I heard through the grapevine that the right thing to do in those situations was to say, "Good day, Mr. Director." The belief was that the doors had opened for the ghost of Alan Dulles. OHB was his project, after all, but he never got to move in his office because he was replaced as CIA director just before the building was completed. I'm a police officer on the emergency response team in a busy borough of London. One evening, we got a call about a suspected domestic disturbance in a block of flats. The informant reported hearing screams and noises coming from the flat above her. When my colleague and I arrived, we made our way to the flat in question. I hadn't heard anything on the way up, and honestly, there was no sign of a disturbance, nothing out of the ordinary at all. After knocking twice and getting no response, my colleague decided to head downstairs to speak directly with the informant. I stayed by the door and knocked once more. After a brief pause, an elderly woman opened the door, looking alarmed to see me standing there. She'd clearly just woken up. I explained the situation. Someone had called saying they heard a disturbance coming from her flat. I asked if anyone else was inside, and she seemed puzzled, telling me she lived alone and had been sleeping. I asked if I could come in and check to make sure everything was okay. She agreed and invited me in. The flat was small, with 2 bedrooms, and it was dark except for a hall light and a bedside lamp. I began searching the flat, moving through each room. When I reached the final door, the living room, my colleague radioed me. He asked if I was okay, sounding unusually flustered. I assured him everything was fine and wondered why he sounded so panicked. He told me that while speaking with the informant, he could also hear screaming and loud thuds coming from the flat I was in. I was confused and told him he must be mistaken, as I had heard nothing at all. I was nearly finished searching, and there was no sign of any disturbance. But as I opened the final door, I felt a sudden unease. Like the other rooms, it was dark, but this one was freezing cold. My breath misted in the air. There was no one inside, no signs of a struggle, and no open windows. I called my colleague and asked him to listen for my footsteps. He confirmed he could hear me stamping my feet, but said the screaming had stopped. That coincided with the moment I opened the door. I left shortly after, apologizing to the elderly woman for waking her. To this day, I have no rational explanation for what happened. My colleague and I both left feeling deeply unsettled, and I've never been able to shake that feeling. In 2013, I worked at the Naval Hospital in Camp Pendleton as part of the transition team that moved the last of the belongings from the old location to the new one. Along with the rest of my team, we did the final sweep of the hospital, cleaning up, waxing the floors, and locking up some of the higher level rooms. It was a pretty nice gig because there was a ton of office supplies going to waste, along with office chairs. Being someone who liked to draw, I took home 2 chairs, one for myself, one for my roommate, and a bunch of pens and paper. My duty section also included the role of watching over the old barracks, which was just outside the hospital. The Navy, being the Navy, didn't transfer anyone to the new barracks for another 8 months after the move. So, someone still had to stand duty there and patrol the old hospital to keep away any potential vandals who thought the place was abandoned. One night, I ended up getting duty and started hearing from people in the commons area that I should go check out the hospital. Apparently, there was a light on in either the 6th or 7th floor, with a figure standing motionless by the window, staring outside. I didn't think too much of it at first, so I put up a sign saying I'd be leaving the office and included my personal number in case anyone needed anything. Usually, it was just calls to reset key cards, but since each room had 4 units, people often just called their roommates to open the door instead of waiting for me to reset their card. It was already pretty late at night, so I wasn't worried about it. When I went to check the hospital, everything was still locked up tight. I checked the windows to make sure none were ajar, but the hospital didn't have any that opened. I even tried lifting the back hatch where linens and supplies were delivered, but it was still securely fastened. There was no way in from that point, so when my chief came down around 2 a.m., which they didn't do often but were required to at least once a night, I made a report. By the time my chief arrived, the figure was gone, but the light was still on. I was never told if they found anyone or followed up on it, but it's definitely one of the creepiest things I remember from my time there. I was a military policeman in the Marine Corps stationed at Camp Lejeune. One night, we got a call from a terrified wife who said kids were trying to get into her house just after midnight. Initially, we thought it was just a drunken spouse call, so we weren't on high alert. We just wanted to make sure she was all right. When we knocked on the door and announced ourselves, the woman opened up, visibly shaken with puffy eyes. She told us that 4 children with red eyes had rung her doorbell and asked to come inside. When she refused, they got angry and began terrorizing her for about 5 minutes. Her own child had already been put to bed, and her husband was deployed, leaving her alone to deal with it. I decided to do a quick check around the entire housing property to make sure everything was clear. But there was nothing unusual, just quiet. My partner and I then decided to do a little walking patrol of the housing area. In each housing area, there's usually a decent-sized playground, so we headed over there. As we approached, we both saw some kids on the swings. The thing is, curfew for kids on base was 8 p.m., unless they were accompanied by an adult. These kids were clearly breaking curfew. As soon as they noticed us, they stopped swinging and just stared at us, unblinking. That's when the unease really set in. Both of us were spooked, and without saying a word, we slowly backed away and turned around, making sure not to look back. We didn't speak about it the rest of the night. The next day, I did some research online since Camp Lejeune is known for its paranormal activity. I found out that these little red-eyed kids have been reported before. That definitely made the whole experience feel a lot creepier than it already was. It wasn't exactly terrifying, but it was definitely strange, and a case I've never been able to explain. 3 years ago, I was called in to investigate a burglary at a cemetery. When I arrived with the forensics team, it was a slow morning. None of the deputies who had responded had actually entered the mausoleum yet. For deputies and a sergeant were all standing outside, securing the scene, because it was still dark and they didn't want to go into the dark mausoleum that had been broken into. Apparently, they felt safer letting us overweight, non-sworn staff handle it, so we went inside together. The exterior door to the mausoleum had been forced open, and we started searching for signs of stolen or vandalized property. Eventually, we discovered something pretty disturbing. One of the graves in the mausoleum, nearly 15 feet off the ground, had its cement plaque shattered. The coffin was pulled out and left on the floor, its contents completely missing. 3 sets of cremated remains, including the remains of the last person, who had died in 2004. Whoever did this would have needed a ladder, or at the very least been at least 12 to 13 feet tall. The forensics guy noted that it looked like the plaque had been broken from the inside, likely due to water damage. But still, it seemed like an odd coincidence, especially that the plaque had broken the night of a break-in. This grave hadn't been disturbed since 2004, so almost 12 years before. The only living relative of the deceased was still around, so I gave them a call. After a brief exchange, when I asked about the mausoleum, they responded with a quick, "No habla English," and hung up. It's probably drug-related somehow, but it felt more like something straight out of vampire or zombie apocalypse movie, an event that, for some reason, just didn't sit right with me. I responded to a call one night about a woman being stabbed. Thankfully, she survived, but it would have been much worse if we hadn't gotten there when we did. My partner, who's also a good friend of mine, and I were dispatched with very little information, just a possible domestic situation, and the person on the other end of the line wasn't saying much. We knocked on the door, but no one answered. We started checking the windows, trying to listen for any sound that might give us a clue, but as we did, I started getting this horrible feeling. I couldn't explain why, but something just felt off. My partner joked that it was probably a prank call, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We had no way of knowing for sure if someone was hurt, if we were at the right house, or if a crime had even been committed, but I knew we couldn't leave. We pounded on the door for about 15 minutes, and just as I was starting to think we might have to call it, a woman suddenly came bursting out of the house, covered in stab wounds. Right behind her, a man stepped out with bloody hands, holding 2 knives. We immediately arrested him. It was strange, though. Normally, if someone doesn't answer the door, we'd have left, assuming it was nothing. But for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to leave that night. Something told me to stay, and I'm so glad we did. I worked security for a few years after high school, and I definitely encountered some strange situations that I still can't explain. One night, I was working with another guard who became a close friend. We'd often chat over the phone or through our earpieces while patrolling. One evening, he mentioned he was in the oldest building in town, which had a basement that was rumored to be haunted. He didn't say much more than that, and we were both quiet for a bit. Then, over the phone, I heard a voice whispering the word door in a long, drawn-out hiss, with an audible breath at the end. At first, I thought it was him playing a prank, so I asked him to repeat himself. He sounded confused and said he hadn't said anything. I didn't mention what I heard at first, not wanting to freak him out, but when he left the building, I told him what happened. He was freaked out, too, because it definitely wasn't something he would have done to mess with me. Another bizarre incident involved transporting a psych patient who was completely out of it, agitated and barely coherent. The nurses had given him antipsychotics to calm him down, and he was more subdued, though still not making much sense. As we drove, he suddenly turned to me, looked me in the eyes, and said in a clear, almost conversational tone, "Well, you look like you're ready to bury another dog." I was stunned, and after a moment of confusion, I realized that just that morning, I had found my dog had passed away in her sleep and had buried her. It was incredibly odd. His expression of lucidity quickly faded, and he returned to his mumbling and rocking. He wasn't even eating the chips they'd sent with him. He was chewing on the bag itself. One of the creepiest places I had to patrol was an old building that would sometimes have doors unlocked when I came back around. I checked them on my first patrol, and they were secure, but later on my second or third pass, they'd be open. And these weren't just regular doors. Some were bay doors that required a latch to be lifted from the inside. The building had alarms on every door, so I knew when something was open. The weird part? The owners weren't concerned and just shrugged it off, saying the doors do that sometimes. If employees had been the ones opening the doors, I'd have been able to see exactly who did it and when. But no one ever seemed to be there. On top of that, there were noises, hissing sounds, thumping on the roof, and bay doors shaking when the others weren't. It always gave me the creeps. The guard before me had actually quit halfway through his shift a few weeks after getting promoted to lieutenant. He dropped off his gear, left a letter of resignation, and refused to talk to anyone about what happened. I asked a friend of mine who knew the guard but he said he refused to speak about it. There was another time when we were picking up a psych patient from an ER and passed by the hospital morgue. We both heard loud sobbing coming from inside. We flagged down a nurse who called security to investigate, but they found nothing. The morgue was locked, and the sound seemed to come from inside, but no one was there. One of the creepiest sights I had to patrol at night was an outdoor theater on the edge of town. There was an old murder case tied to it, a body found on the grounds that was believed to be the victim of Ted Bundy. The area was dark, almost unnaturally so, and no matter the time, it felt oppressive. Even with a full moon, I had to use a flashlight to see anything. But it wasn't until my first night patrolling there that something truly strange happened. I stopped for a smoke break, turned off my flashlight because the battery was running low, and after finishing my cigarette, I went back to my patrol. When I switched on the light again, I froze. My shadow was being cast out in front of me, as if there was a light behind me, even though there wasn't. I was completely alone. I quickly turned around, expecting to see someone behind me, but there was nothing. I couldn't find anything that would have caused my shadow to be cast in that direction. I panicked a bit, yelped, and quickly walked back to my car, using my phone's dim light because I didn't want to see that shadow again. I never had that happen again, though, and I couldn't recreate the situation to explain it. The place had a weird darkness to it that made everything feel off, but after that, there weren't any other incidents I couldn't explain, aside from the occasional heart attack when a mountain lion screamed in the distance, or a guy proposing to his fiancée out there. All in all, working security had its weird moments, but that place, it definitely felt haunted. I have to patrol this abandoned daycare, and let me tell you, it's incredibly eerie. Each room feels different, like the temperature shifts the second you step inside. Some rooms feel freezing, while others are uncomfortably warm. Strange sounds echo through the empty halls, and sometimes, when you look up, you'll spot old toys wedged in the roof panels. The creepy part? Occasionally, those toys will somehow end up on the floor of the rooms, as if something or someone moved them. Another unsettling thing is the pressure in certain rooms. It's like you're at the bottom of a swimming pool with this weird, heavy feeling in the air. Every time I step in, there's this overwhelming urge to just leave, to get out of there as fast as possible. I've heard whispers that a child died at that daycare a long time ago, and I can't help but wonder if that's tied to all the weirdness. I don't know for sure, but it sure feels like there's something lingering in that place. A few weeks ago, I responded to a 911 call where a woman was screaming at the dispatcher, "She's going to kill me. She's going to kill me. Come quick, I'm at address." Naturally, every available unit in my sector, and I rushed to the scene, lights and sirens blaring. But when we got there, we discovered that the house had been abandoned for years. It was completely deserted. So, we set up a perimeter with officers covering all exits while my shift partner, a female officer, and I made our way inside. We cleared the first floor and proceeded to the second. As soon as we reached the top of the stairs, a slight movement caught our attention. Instinctively, my partner and I raised our weapons, ready for anything. We rushed into the room, and at first glance, we thought we saw a body hanging in a noose. But when we looked closer, there was nothing there. Just an old noose. We cleared the rest of the second floor and took a closer look at the noose. There was some dried blood on it and what looked like old peeled off skin. It was a chilling sight, and we realized that it had probably been there for over a decade, likely the remnants of suicide that had happened long before we arrived. At first, though, we thought it could have been something more recent. Once we cleared the house, we all agreed that the place felt way too dead for anything to have happened there recently. We decided to call in detectives for further investigation. However, before we left, we all had the same unspoken understanding. There was no way we had seen what we thought we saw. The reason we didn't openly discuss it is because my department has a strict policy about paranormal occurrences. If anyone reports something like that, they're immediately suspended from duty and required to hand in their badge, gun, duty belt, and vest. They're then taken for a psychological evaluation. So, to play it safe, I called my supervisor at the end of my shift and told him everything that had happened. I did the right thing by voluntarily going in for an evaluation. Integrity comes first. Since then, I've passed that house several times. Every time, I feel this overwhelming unease, like something is off about it. It's hard to explain, but it's almost like the place is alive in a way. It seems like the city agrees with me, too. Just 3 days ago, I found out the house has been marked as the #1 demolition priority in my sector, and it'll be torn down by the end of the month. But the part that bothers me the most is that I'll have to go back inside next week to collect any items that could be of interest to the city or my superiors. At least I won't be going alone. Oh, and the woman who called 911, she was charged with public mischief for misuse of 911 and misleading officers. In the 1980s, I was serving as a Met police officer with the Diplomatic Protection Group. One night, I was on duty guarding a government building in Carlton House Terrace, right in the heart of London. It was the early hours of the morning, and I decided to take a walk around the perimeter to ensure everything was secure. I opened the front door to begin my check, and to my surprise, there was a young boy standing about 12 feet away from me. He was dressed in an old-fashioned Edwardian outfit, tweed cap, jacket, +4s, long socks, and all. He was also holding a heavy, vintage-style leather football. The area where this building is located is frequently used for filming, and it has a very atmospheric, almost timeless feel. Think Sherlock Holmes. Curious, I greeted the boy. "Hello, what are you doing here?" He smiled and bounced the ball. But when the ball hit the ground, it made no sound at all. That's when I noticed something even stranger. Standing behind the boy was a woman. She looked to be in her late 30s, wearing a small straw hat decorated with flowers and cherries. Her long, cream-colored cotton dress was of the Edwardian style, complete with leg of mutton sleeves. The woman raised her hand, gesturing for the boy to come to her. The boy waved back at me, still smiling, and then walked over to her. They both turned away from me and, just like that, vanished. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I know I wasn't dreaming. I immediately requested a signal check from my control, trying to make sense of the bizarre encounter. My mind kept turning over the possibility that I had somehow experienced a time slip, something that shouldn't have been possible. But there was no denying what I had seen. About 4 years ago, I got a call on a non-emergency line from a woman I'll call Lucy. She said she'd locked herself out of her house and needed help. I was dispatched to take the report in case fire department needed to force entry. I got there first and immediately noticed something unusual. There was a lit candle and a few statues visible through the upstairs window. The light in the room was also on, and for some reason, it just felt off to me. I couldn't quite explain it, but it stood out. When I approached Lucy, who looked to be about 65, I asked her what had happened. She explained that she had walked to her car to grab groceries for herself and her mother, but had forgotten her keys inside. The door had locked behind her. I asked if her mother was home, and she said yes. But then she told me something strange. She actually lived alone because her mother had passed away 6 years ago. However, Lucy believed her mother still lived with her. Her presence was felt in the house, she said. The lights would turn on and off, doors would open and close on their own, and sometimes the bathroom faucet would turn itself on. I walked around the house to check for any other entry points, and that's when I found an unlocked window into the kitchen. Since Lucy confirmed she was the only one at home and no one else was inside, I radioed dispatch and climbed in through the window with her permission. As soon as my boot hit the kitchen floor, I heard a distinct click. At the same time, the lights in the stairway and the hallway upstairs to my left flicked off. I quickly made my way to the rear sliding door and told Lucy what had happened. She just laughed and said, "Oh, that's just my mom saying hello." Even though I wanted to believe her, I had to make sure no one else was inside. I radioed for backup, and within minutes, my partner showed up. The first thing he asked about was the lit candle in the window. We headed upstairs to clear the area, and when we reached the room with the candle, we noticed something chilling. It had been blown out. There was no wind, no draft, no open windows, no fans. The flame was just gone. We exchanged a look, both of us unsettled, but we kept going and headed back downstairs. As we were about to leave, the upstairs lights flicked off behind us with another click. We talked to Lucy for a few more minutes and suggested she get a battery-operated candle to avoid any further issues. Well, Lucy wasn't exactly worried about taking our advice. To this day, that candle still burns in the window most nights when I drive by. Every now and then, I stop to check in on Lucy just to see how she and her mother are doing. There's something about that place, though. I can't quite shake the feeling that there's more going on than I'll ever fully understand. One evening, I was alone at my parents' house while they were away, and I heard a strange scraping or grinding sound coming from the ground floor bedroom. The door was closed at the time, and the noise almost sounded like glass being cut or maybe a screen being scraped. It went on intermittently for a few minutes, and I was absolutely terrified. I rushed upstairs, my heart pounding, and called a friend of mine who lived nearby. He was willing to drive over and park in the driveway, where he'd be able to see the window of the room in question. I didn't call the police because I was worried that if nothing was wrong, they'd just think I was overreacting. Plus, there were no trees around that could explain the sound. My friend arrived, didn't see anything suspicious, and knocked on the door. We went into the room together, but everything seemed normal. There was no one inside, and there were no signs of a break-in. As we walked back out of the bedroom, we finally discovered the source of the noise. The concrete foundation of the house had started to shift, and it was causing the tile floor to buckle. We both laughed, relieved it wasn't anything sinister. But I'll admit, when it first happened, I was pretty freaked out. I work at a maximum security prison, and there's this one elevator that goes from the lobby to our lineup room and locker area, then up to the admin building. For some reason, this elevator has a strange habit. It'll go from the lobby to the third floor, the doors open, then pause, then close, and it'll head back down to the lobby, repeating the same cycle. Open, pause, close. It happens at random intervals throughout the day. Sometimes it happens a few times in a row, then nothing for hours. Other times it'll go up and down every 10 minutes for an hour, or just a couple of times over a few hours. It's unpredictable, and honestly, it's pretty unsettling. There were several times at my old house when I'd wake up in a complete panic, convinced someone was inside. I'd hear noises, footsteps, creaks, things moving, and each time, I'd clear the house as best I could, checking every room before heading back to bed. I'm certain there was never anyone there, but man, it sure sounded like it. Houses settling, wind blowing, and all kinds of little sounds can easily mimic the sound of someone walking around. Sometimes it just all lines up in the scariest way. It's terrifying to hear, especially when you're half asleep. Those were the moments I seriously considered buying a gun for protection. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.